We've been asked a question about stock control, and I'd like to know if we could explain the reasoning behind implementing stock control. Now, the common thought with why we have stock control is obviously to manage the costs of our inventory, which it absolutely is. We would like to know at any point in time how much dollar value of inventory do we have in stock, because inventory costs us money. We have storage costs, and we have depreciation costs, and we have interest on the purchasing costs, and we have all sorts of costs, capital costs and so on with stock control. And that's fine and that's great, but stock control goes much further than just managing the costs of stock on jobs. So let's talk, for example, about widgets. We have 500 widgets in stock in the main store, in various vans out in the field. We've got 10 vans out in the field, and in this particular case, Joe's out in his van and he needs a widget for a job. He doesn't have any widgets in his van. So what's Joe going to do? Well, if we don't have stock control, he could get on the phone, I guess, and start ringing around and asking people if they have widgets available. You know, does the storeman have a widget? If they have a storeman, does whatever. But what he's probably not going to do that. What he's probably going to do is just get in his car and go down to the hardware store and go and buy a widget. So you've got 500 widgets sitting elsewhere, but he's gone and bought a widget because he doesn't know where the widgets are. Now, with stock control implemented, he could do an inquiry for widgets, and it could show them exactly where the widgets are, and he could notice that Fred, who's doing another job just a couple of kilometres down the road, happens to have some widgets in his van. And he could therefore, rather than go and purchase the widgets, go and meet Fred and get some widgets out of his van and go and use those on the job. So one of the reasons for stock control is to be able to have visibility as to where your stock actually is at any point in time. Now, another reason for having stock control is to manage disappearing stock. Now, what do we mean by disappearing stock? Well, we call it black stock. Now, imagine the scenario whereby you go and order 10 widgets for a job. And you order them in, you come, you go out to the job. It could be widgets, it could be, rolls of electrical wire, it could be gas, bottles of gas, it could be whatever it happens to be. And so we've got our 10 widgets, and they only end up using 8 widgets on the job. So there's 2 widgets left over, or there's half a roll of wire left over, or there's, so many kilograms of gas left over, or whatever. So what happens to those other 2 widgets? Well, if we don't have stock control enabled, those 2 widgets are pretty much unaccounted for. Okay, yes, you saw that we purchased 10 widgets for stock, and then at some point later you see that 8 widgets were used on a job, but there's no connection with the fact that 2 widgets have just disappeared. We assume they're in his van, but what if they're not in his van? What if they just walked away? And something like that. So if we implement stock control, then we can know exactly the fact that we purchased 10 widgets into stock, we transferred 10 widgets into the guy's van, he's used 8 widgets on a job, therefore in theory there should be 2 widgets left in his van. And we can do a stock report of what should be in his van, and then stock take that van and then actually see the fact that these widgets have disappeared, or that they're there, and so on. And so we can manage this disappearing black stock much better if we have stock control. And it's a serious problem for a lot of businesses, this stuff that just disappears, and so on. And so that's another reason for having stock control, is for managing disappearing stock, or stock takes of where things are. And obviously the other one which you've mentioned earlier is stock value. I mean, we need to know what the value of the stock is. Another great reason we have stock control is that we can start to see purchasing histories. We want to keep just-in-time stock, or just enough stock. We don't want to have too much in stock, we don't want to have too little in stock. And it just so happens we're a conditioning company. It turns out that, in the summer months we use a lot more parts, and in the winter months it slows right down and we don't use hardly any. So we could get historical purchasing usage history of parts over time frames over a year, and preempt our expected usage, and then order in advance what we think is an appropriate quantity to hold in stock to take into account the peak demand periods, or reducing our purchasing in the low demand periods as well. So stock control also gives us the ability to not only see what's in stock right now, but to see a history of what we've used over periods of time. For purchasing stock, for quantity calculations, for working out how much stock we need to have at any point in time. We can also use stock control and the purchasing side of stock control to identify, lowest cost suppliers, or and those sorts of things to make it better. But that's more purchasing than stock control as such. So so another reason we would use stock control is to manage the processes within an organisation. Okay, what we don't want is for a job to be created by a user, and then that user just puts the parts on the job straight away, because they're not on the job. Someone still has to go pick it out of the store, give it to the tech has to drive to the site, put the parts on use it, and so on. So there's a timeliness there for stock control. The stock goes through different stages. So by separating the functions of people, by separating the physical movement of stock and giving that to a storeman function, as opposed to the requesting of stock from someone who's actually creating the job or the quote or whatever, to the purchasing of it for the storeman, to the actual usage by the tech in the field, at the actual time they end up getting used, we can more accurately see where our stock levels at any point in time. So there's this workflow of timeliness where stock flows from one state to another, that stock control can also handle. And that's especially important when we have multi-location stock control, where typically you would bring it into a store, you then take it out of the store and put it into a holding bay waiting for the courier to come and pick it up. You'd then move it into transit. It would then arrive on site. So then you'd move it to the client's location. There could be various stages at which the stock would move from location to location. That's quite advanced stock control, but still, that's another reason why you would implement stock control. You could also have stock not at main locations, but within bins. And you may want to just use stock control to know where something is to go and get it. I mean, if you've got a humongous warehouse, and you've got 10,000 items in that warehouse, it'd be very nice to actually go into a stock system and let it actually tell you where that item is, what bin it's in, or it could be in multiple bins or something like that. So stock control is also good for that as well. The other great usage for stock control is to managing not the value of the inventory, but the costs of inventory. By implementing average costing, you can then very easily account for the cost of the items on jobs relatively accurately, and I use that term in quote inverted commas if you understand what average costing is, whilst being able to get a very accurate value of stock at any point in time. And as you start to receive goods in that get more expensive, your average cost will go up for profitability purposes, and if you start to the costs start to drop down on your purchasing, the average costs will go down, and so on. So managing average costing, which not everyone wants to use, but a lot of people like to use average costing, is really only achievable if we have stock control turned on. I'll give you an example of I have 2 widgets in stock, and they both cost me $10. So my total stock value is $20, and I purchase another widget, and it happens to cost me $7. So, and I bring that in. So my total stock is now valued at $27, but the average cost per unit will now be $9 because that's 27 divided by 3. So I can multiply 9 by 3 to get 27. When I take one of those widgets out and put it on a job, the cost will be 9. That 9 is not actually an actual cost of anything, but it's an approximation of cost across your entire inventory. I can only do that if I have average costing, and I can only do average costing if I actually have stock control enabled. So, and there's probably a whole bunch of other reasons why we would have stock control as well. So it's far more than just getting a value of inventory. It actually helps you to manage your inventory, manage your costings, your profitability, your movement of stock, your workflows, your processes, and that sort of thing. Here's the catch. Not a lot of people implement stock control. Why don't they? Any ideas why a lot of people don't implement stock control?
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
Time-consuming.
It's complicated. It takes effort. It takes time. It takes procedures and processes, and a lot of businesses that take on TSM are in such a mess that that's the last thing they want to think about. You know, that's way down their list of priorities in terms of what they want to fix up. So not everyone implements stock control because it's tough to implement stock control.